Hi, my name is Marcus Placona. I'm a developer evangelist for a company called Twilio. Who's not heard about Twilio here? Okay, so if you went to my previous talk, then you have. But Twilio is a communications API that helps developers like yourselves adding messages, voice, like telephone calls, chat, video, and push notifications into the applications you're already building using the languages you already know. So, be it any kind of like mainstream languages you might be using, we have libraries for those, and we have a RESTful API as well. So even if we don't have a library, it's a RESTful API. I'd be happy to talk to you more about Twilio later if you want to know more. But today, I'm here to talk to you about security, and specifically security on mobile, right? How many of you are Android developers here? Any iOS developers? Wow, no iOS here. Cool. I was gonna say, all the examples I'm gonna be showing you today are Android examples. They totally apply for mobile in general, okay? So the same problems you're gonna find on Android, you might be able to find them on iOS as well. But I am gonna be focusing on Android today, and hopefully, even if you're not a mobile developer, most of the things you're gonna see here today are gonna be of some use to you. There's some information about me up there. So again, I'm Marcus Placona. There's my Twitter account there. There's my GitHub account. So if you want to find me on GitHub, if you want to see the code I'm actually running today, you will be able to find that on my GitHub account. And I also run AndroidSecurity.info, which is basically where I put all of my exploits, all of the things I find, and all of the ways you can actually secure an application. It's just a website where I just dump everything in there. And there's quite a few things you're going to be able to find there, especially if you are an Android developer, because all the examples are for Android. But before I actually move on, there's a few things I want to tell you about. One of them is I am not a hacker, okay? Even though I have the mask, I am not a hacker. So what I do is I am a person who deeply cares about security. I think about security quite a lot. I try and hack my friends' applications, and I try and make sure that mobile applications are actually secure, okay? I am very skeptical about just installing any mobile application on my device, and this really started after I started looking at how security actually is on mobile, okay? So, like I said, I do care about security. I think a lot about it. This is not the front of my house, by the way, but I do think a lot about it, and I kind of want to run through a quick disclaimer with you. It's really quick. You can read that. Like it's not long at all. But the important thing here is I haven't really hacked your app. Okay, I know the title of this talk is I've just hacked your app, and I have to say I haven't really hacked your app. And the reason I have to say I haven't really hacked your app is because this is a term I totally came up with. Companies tend to get suey when you hack their apps and you go on stage and you show that you hacked their apps, okay? So no naming and shaming here. All of the things I'm going to be showing you, all of the examples I'm going to be showing you are from my applications, okay? So those are applications I built with the purpose of being hacked. And what you're going to find is that some of these applications have a small resemblance with applications you might be using. But again, I'm not naming names here. That's not my intent, okay? Now, all the boring stuff. Let's go back and look at how HTTP communication works, okay? Because I'm sure that if you're not a mobile developer, you may have done something to do with HTTP. And let's just look at how HTTP communications work. You've got a client there, you've got a server right here. Client makes a request to the server. Server then responds with a response, and it's all good. So this is the principle of HTTP requests, okay? You may have some security in the middle, you may have other things, but the principle of an HTTP request is this. Make a request, get a response. Great. Now, let's introduce a new character to this, okay? Which I am representing as a pirate flag, right? So what happens when we introduce this new character is, instead of the user making a request to the server, the user makes a request to this new character. This new character then relays this request to the server. And what happens now is, the user doesn't really know that a request is going through something else. The server doesn't really know that it's actually returning to something else. But that thing in the middle is called the man in the middle. Okay, so this is a very famous hack where you basically intercept every single request from the user to the server, from the server to the user. And this is exactly what I just did right now in the beginning of this presentation. I was using a man-in-the-middle hack to find out what the API keys were, how to get access to that server, how to get access to that API, and how to steal information if I wanted to. Okay? Now, why is this important? And maybe I should give you a better example of a very famous man-in-the-middle hack that maybe will resonate with some of you.
I wanna be the very best.
Who's still playing Pokemon Go? No shame. I'm still playing Pokemon Go too. It's fine. So, what happened to Pokemon Go? So if you're not playing Pokemon Go, or if you haven't ever played Pokemon Go, the premise is very simple. You have an application like this, and you walk around and you find Pokemon. This is it. Like, you just walk around and you find Pokemon. So the intent with this application is you get Pikachus, you get Squirtles, and you get Bulbasaurs, and you know it's so very happy and everything. But you need to walk around, so you need to have your phone with you, and you need to walk around. Now, some really clever developers said, "Well, this is all good. I really want to get some Pikachus, but I really don't want to have to walk around." Because this application was using an API, the application would always make a request to the API to say what the latitude and longitude were. So theoretically, the API doesn't really know that you're moving. The application tells the API that you're moving. And someone really clever said, do you know what? What if I could have some arrows inside the application? So this doesn't come with the application, okay? Someone said, what if I could have some arrows inside the application so I can actually make my character move? Surely I should be able to make API requests to the Pokemon API to make my character move. And this is exactly what they did. Okay? Now, let's just look at this for a bit and think about what the motivation was here. Okay? Because the real motivation was, I want to catch more Pikachus. That's it. Okay? I just want to walk around. I want to hatch. You can hatch eggs on Pokemon as well. But I want to hatch some eggs and I want to catch some Pikachus. That was it. Okay? So that's an interesting motivation if you're into Pokemons, but, you know. Now, let's look at a different example here. Has anyone heard about Kuba Gretzky? Okay. Is anyone Polish here? Okay. So I'm not about to say anything bad about Polish people, okay? I'm just asking because Kuba Gretzky is actually Polish. And what Kuba Gretzky did was he hacked an Android application to get rewards. And those rewards, again, motivation, those rewards were beer. So that's a much higher motivation here, okay? At least in my opinion. I would much rather get beer than, you know, Pikachus. So the one thing I like to point out in this photo here, which came from the Register, okay? So it's a famous website for news technology. And what they describe at the bottom of the picture is a strangely dressed man drinks beer. The reason I asked if anyone was Polish is because I wanted to ask if you dress like this when you hack someone. Is that what you do? Because this is surely not Kuba Gretzky, okay? Like it says Shutterstock over there, but apparently the Register thinks Polish people actually dress like this when they hack, and maybe they do. Now, back to Kuba Gretzky's story. He managed to hack this application through loyalty. Okay? The way he managed to hack this application through loyalty was he had a loyalty app, much like the apps you can get from Costa or from Starbucks, where whenever you buy 10 coffees, you get a free coffee, except that this was in Poland, and when you bought 5 beers, you would get 1 extra beer. So have the app. Every single time you buy a beer, the app is scanned. Every single time you get 5 beers, you get a free beer. Okay? So let's stick to the motivation here. The way this application worked was you had your beer loyalty app. Then inside the beer loyalty app, you would make a request to an iBeacon. The iBeacon would then give the app information about where to make an HTTP request to. Okay? So let's just like think about the security on this, okay? So you're talking to an iBeacon to know where you need to make an HTTP request to. Then, sure enough, the application would then make an HTTP request to a server to say, hey, Kuba Gretzky just bought 1 beer, give him 1 credit. Well, with his motivation to get free beer, he decided to put an HTTP proxy in the middle of it, and he was intercepting every single one of the requests the application made. And the reason he was doing that was because he wanted to find out how those requests actually worked. And he found this. So if you've not seen something like this before, this is basically an HTTP request where you have a user ID, you have an authentication token here, and pay attention, this is not encrypted or encoded in any way. There was also some information about the beacon, so you knew which store was actually giving that credit, and there was also some information about other products like burgers, but obviously he was only interested in beer. Sure enough, Kuba Gretzky was like, hey, I think I can do that. I can make those requests myself, and I don't need to buy any beers. And yes, he did. And he did it multiple times. Many, many times. In fact, what happened was, Kuba Gretzky got access to an unlimited amount of beer. This is not Kuba Gretzky drinking beer, by the way. But he got access to an unlimited amount of beer. And no one really knows how much beer he actually got access to. I know one thing about Kuba Gretzky, though. He hacked this application, and he decided to tell the world. And he did that through his website. So how I hacked an Android application to get free beer. This is what got him on, certain websites and everything. But if you look at this, and if you can't see the date, it says 18th of August, 2016. Now, at the bottom here, which you can't see, it says something like 14th of July, 2016. And if you scroll down through this guy's blog, you'll see that he used to blog once a month. He doesn't blog anymore. So, either he got in trouble. He didn't name and shame, okay? So he didn't say what the application was. But either he got in trouble because of this, or he's still drinking beer. I guess we'll never know. I actually make a point of accessing this guy's website once a month to see if he published anything. And he's not published anything since that date. Okay, so his website is breakdev.org, and there's like a bunch of information about how he actually did this hack, what kind of stuff he went through. It's really interesting. It's really good to kind of learn about how the minds of a hacker actually works. But cool. So I told you about a hack. I told you about like how something gets hacked. How could the developers have actually stopped this hack? Because obviously, after he published this thing, a lot of people knew about it. And, I don't know what the name of the application was, but he said it was a very known application in Poland. And I'm sure a lot of Polish developers may have, tried to do the same thing. And maybe they did. So let's just look at something, like some of the ways the developers could have actually stopped this. The first one is simple. Encrypt all the values. Like, as you've seen before, when I showed you the HTTP request, all the values were in plain text. There was nothing encrypted. Everything was really readable. And if you know what you're doing, it's very easy for you to just go and replicate this thing and do it time and time again and get free beer time and time again. So encrypting all the values is super simple. If you're an Android developer, you will be familiar with this. We're basically just adding a library into an Android application. So this is using Grado. And basically we go, cool, so I have a message, and I want to encrypt my message with a password that is password, okay? I'm not advocating here that you use a password that is password, but this is just an example. And we're gonna talk about this as well, because obviously this is also in plain text. Likewise, if you want to go and decrypt this message, you can just do the same. So you have your password, you have your encrypted message, and you can just decrypt that thing. So it's simple to do, and the reason I'm showing you this is because I want to make sure that you, yourself, or anyone else never tells you like, oh no, we can't do encryption because it's too hard. This is like only a few lines of code, okay? But now, let's just think about having a password here, okay? Applications can be decrypted, and I am going to show you how to decrypt an application later on today. But applications can be decrypted, and there's like one caveat to this, which is like, don't store any of your passwords inside the application because they can be decrypted. And not only that, if you have passwords inside your application, there's one thing that is going to happen, and that's for sure. They're going to end up on GitHub. Like, how many times have you pushed something to GitHub and you said, oh, crap, my passwords was there? I've done this a few times. And the thing is, when that happens, there's really not much you can do. You can go and delete a repository, but when you realize, it might be too late. In this example here, there's this guy called Luke who basically pushed his AWS keys into GitHub. And when he did that, he realized that he had done it in 20 minutes. And he realized that in 20 minutes, because he got an email from Amazon saying, hey, thank you very much for all the money you spend. You never spend anything. And right now, you're on like $3,500. And he was like, what? So he realized that, and when he realized that, he was like, okay, so there's something wrong. And as it turns out, with AWS keys, what happens is, as soon as you push it, there's people actually listening to all the commits on GitHub, and they're looking for things like authentication token, key, passwords. They're looking for those things, and when they find it, if it's an AWS key, they spin up new servers and they start mining Bitcoins on them. And if you've ever done any Bitcoin mining, you know that it takes a lot of like power and everything. So you can get to this much money really quickly, okay? And this is what happened to Luke. Luke got in touch with Amazon and he said, hey, like, this is not me. And Amazon was like, well, it looks like it's you. Luke then went and tried to refresh every single API provider. Usually they give you a way to get your keys, like retrieve your tokens, and also refresh your tokens so you get a new token. And he did that. And for his luck, when he did that, the old key was still working. So he was on $3,000 when he kind of realized this, and then he went up to almost $3,500. Turns out there was caching on the AWS servers that prevented the key from disappearing. So you could still, for like 20 minutes, you could use both keys, okay? And I say, to his luck, he found that bug. He reported it to Amazon, and Amazon said, okay, you found the bug, so we're gonna, like, you're not gonna have to pay us. So it was good. Like, I'm sure he learned a lesson here. But, let's go back to the other things the developers could actually done to stop it. Okay, so utilize security features when they exist. Remember when I was telling you about how you can use an iBeacon, like they were using iBeacons to get information. As it turns out, iBeacons can actually be protected. Okay, so you can actually secure an iBeacon. In this case, none of the iBeacons were protected, so he was able to get access to everything. All decrypted. He could even go and clone this iBeacon and start his own bar if he wanted to. With all that beer, he could have done that. Certificate pinning is also, who's heard about certificate pinning here? Cool. So certificate pinning is a really important thing because developers, especially mobile developers, have this impression that when they're using an API and this API has an HTTPS in front of it, they feel secure. They're like, oh, this is good because it's like, oh, encrypted, right? As it turns out, it's not. So the example I showed you in the beginning, I was actually going to an HTTPS URL. So as it turns out, it's not. What you can do, though, you can use certificate pinning to say, hey, only my application can use that server, and only that server can talk to my application. So when you try and do a man-in-the-middle attack, for example, you won't be able to spoof the certificate. Okay, so the way certificate pinning works, if you're an Android developer, you'll be familiar with this because this is OKHCP. The way certificate pinning works is you have obviously your host name there, which is your website or where your API is coming from. Then you have your public key, which is the public key from your certificate, and all you do is you just go like certificate pinner.build, and you're basically now saying, okay, so now only my application can talk to this website. If anyone comes in the middle, they won't be able to decrypt it, okay? Unless they have my certificate. But obviously, if they have your certificate, you have bigger problems right now. Now, the other thing that could have been done is, and this is not just in this case, but I always say, like, do not trust the device. Do not trust that the people running your application on a device is actually trustworthy. Because the difference between running a website where everything is running on the same server and you can secure the server, as soon as you have an application running on a mobile phone, there's no way you can secure that. Because it's on a mobile phone, it's my phone, I do whatever I want to do with it. And I say this because eventually someone is going to decompile your application, okay? So this is just one example of what you can use to decompile an application. This is not a hacker's tool. It's called APK tool. It's not a hacker's tool. It's open source. It's all like, it's a tool to decompile applications, okay? Maybe you're going to want to decompile your applications to see what kind of information you're actually giving away inside your application. Maybe you're going to want to do like me and decompile your friends' applications to just tell them like what they're doing wrong. You could, this is not a hacker's tool. But decompiling an application kind of sounds like, whoa, this is complex, right? So how do you go and decompile an application? Like, it's easy to decompile like a jar file or something. But the one thing about APKs, the one thing about Android applications is the APK, which is the file you get when you compile your application, is just a zip file. And decompiling an application is as easy as this. So you go APK tool, name of the application, and boom, that's decompiled now. When you decompile this application, you now get access to everything that is inside of it. And what I'm doing here, I'm looking for stuff like oath, user, passwords. I'm looking for all these things that I think might be inside this application. And sure enough, when I do that, I find that yes, there's an API password and there is a username inside this application. And you would be surprised how many APKs out there have information just like this. Okay, I'm not talking about a dozen applications. I'm talking about hundreds of applications out there that you download and you find information like this. Okay? And obviously when you find information like this, sometimes you're going to find user details, for example. Sometimes you're going to find things that you shouldn't find because, they're private. But you find this all the time. But yeah, so we're talking about having passwords inside the application and how, I'm telling you shouldn't do that, and then you come to me and you say, well, yeah, but I need to have those magic strings. Like, if I want to use an API, where am I going to get the key from if it's not in my application? So there are a few things you can do. The first thing is, if you don't want to have too much trouble, encrypt it. Just like if you have keys, encrypt them. And then you can just decrypt them on the other side. So that's one way you can do it. It's not the safest way because like for every encryption, there is a decryption. Okay, you can, a lot of like encryption algorithms have been broken. So it's just something to be careful about. But if you have this thing right now on your application, like if you have plain text on your application right now, then, the quickest thing you can do is just go and encrypt it. Now, the next thing you can do is you can get your keys from the server. So instead of having keys inside your application, you can make your application, ping the server and say, hey, can I get the keys? And now you can make sure your application is secure, you have certificate pinning, you can make sure your server is secure, so no one else can get to your server. There's a third way you can do that as well, which is storing your information on the NDK. Okay, so if you're not an Android developer, if NDK doesn't sound like something you know about, the NDK is basically the native development kit. So this is where you can get low level, you can get to like C++ libraries, or you can write C++ libraries that run inside your Android application. Now, the one reason I say you could go to the NDK is because if you try and decompile an NDK library, if you try and decompile a C library, it's going to look like nothing. Like it's going to look like garbage. Okay? So unless you're really good with like hex editing, for example, and you know exactly what you're looking for, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to break it. So this is one way you can do that. There's another thing I didn't mention. At the bottom of all my slides, there's links which you can, if you want to read more about it. This is on androidsecurity.info, which is the website I run. And like I said, there's going to be some information there. I am going to publish those slides later as well, so you don't need to take pictures or like try and copy the URLs, but they all have the URLs there. Cool, so we talked about things that developers can do to stop hacking, okay? But the thing is, when you need to stop, it means you've already been hacked. Like you're not in a good situation anymore because you're trying to stop someone from doing things. So let's talk about things you can do to start. Let's talk about things you can proactively do into your applications so they don't get hacked, so you don't need to stop anything. The one thing that is like super easy to do and most Android developers don't know about is tampering detection. There are ways you can actually know whether your application has been broken into, for example. If someone decompiled your application and tried to like publish it to a different market, if someone renamed your application, and this happens a lot, there are ways you can actually do that. You can actually find out if someone tried to break into your application. So checking for that is really simple. So tampering detection is basically like you are checking whether, in this case, we're checking whether the package name has been changed. So if the package name is not the name I think it is, if the package name is not the same as my app, someone actually recompiled it, then you can tell the user, hey, you shouldn't continue. There are other things you can do as well, which is like you can check whether the application was downloaded from certain markets. So I'm checking for Google here, and I'm checking for Amazon, which is the markets I use. If you have different markets, then you just need to have them here, like you just need to check for them. But this is a good way of stopping people from like publishing your applications to like alternative markets. And this happens a lot, and the reason this happens is if you have any kind of monetization inside your app where you have like tracking IDs, for example, what some people will do is they'll decompile your app, they'll put their tracking ID, and they'll just publish it again. And users will download it and they'll be like none the wiser. But now you're not making any money out of your applications. You're probably still getting bugs, but you're not making any money out of your applications, and someone else is. Okay? And tracking those people is really hard. So having things like this actually helps you. Okay? Check for application signature. Every single time you release an application, so every single time you compile an application, it generates a signature. And the signature looks something like this. And what you can do is you can now check that the signature of the application running is the same as yours. And if it's not, again, you can say, hey, you shouldn't be using this application because I didn't sign it. It doesn't have my signature. It doesn't have it's not my release. It's someone else's release. So that's when you can tell people about this. And again, we are looking at different layers you can add to put security in your application. There's going to be no silver bullet here. Like, I'm not going to finish this talk by saying, do that and you're going to be safe. Like, there's not going to be any silver bullets, but we are looking at different layers that you can add into your application to make them more secure. Now, it's only a matter of time until actually someone copies your application. And I know I said this before, but when you look at my app was copied, Android, there's almost 4.5 million results from people who actually had their applications copied. So if you think that's not going to happen to you, it is. Like, it might be happening right now. Someone may have copied your application. So it's kind of important to make sure you try and, so 4.5 million results. So it's kind of important that you try and make sure no one gets to copy your application. And this happens quite a lot. Checking for router devices. This is my favorite one, okay? Because there's this big talk about, okay, so like a router device, should I let my application run on a router device or not? And there's a choice to be made right here, okay? So checking for router devices is as simple as this. What you try to do is you try and execute a command, like su, for example, for super user, and if you can execute it, it means this device is rooted. The one thing about router devices is, as soon as a device is rooted, all of your security features kind of go out the window, okay? Because when a device is rooted, you get access to everything on it, like everything. And if you use something like exposed, for example, it makes a hacker's life much easier to actually hack an application, okay? So with exposed, there's a famous hack on exposed that is called hooking. And the idea with hooking is you now listen to a method that gets called inside your application, and when that method gets called, you can trigger something, okay? So the reason hackers will do that is, in this example here, we're looking at the clock change. So every single time the clock changes, we can go and log something. So in this case, we're just being nice. We're just changing some text, okay? But with hooking and with exposed, people can do like horrible things to your application. Okay? So when I say check for rooted devices, it's worth thinking about this, but I wouldn't, if I had a game, for example, and I wasn't making any money on it, I wouldn't stop people with rooted devices from using my application. If I was a bank, I would probably do. Okay, so the rooted device thing is like, you need to make a choice there, because if you stop people from using your application because they have a rooted device, but you have no reasons for that, then maybe you're basically like barring some of your users. So it's something to think about. It's something to try and make a choice. I would say banks, yes, you can't have a rooted device. Full stop. If you have a game or if you have an app that doesn't I'm sure that the Riga Dev Days app doesn't need to care about my phone being rooted or not. It doesn't really make any difference, okay? Like, I'm not going to do anything bad by having a rooted device. But it's something to keep in mind, and a lot of people just don't. Like, either they go like, oh, no, it's rooted, so no, or they just don't think about this. So it's worth thinking about whether you're going to allow rooted devices to go through or not. Check for emulator. So emulator is a funny one because I don't think any of my applications need to run on an emulator when I release them. They need to run on an emulator when I'm building them, but they don't need to run an emulator, like if I put it on the market, for example. So checking for emulator is as simple as this. You're basically just checking for generic. Like if the fingerprint, so if it's running on a generic device, which is the Android emulator in this case, then stop it, like you can do something about it, okay? So I can't really think of a reason why an Android application, like a released Android application, needs to run an emulator. So this, in my opinion, is a no-brainer. Like, just make sure it doesn't run on emulators, because hackers actually tend to run applications on emulators when they want to hack it, because it's much easier than running on a phone. You can make changes, you can do hex editing and everything from the emulator. It's much easier than just having that on a phone. Check if the application is debuggable. And this one is an interesting one because obviously when you release your application, when you're ready to put it on the market, your application is not in debug mode. Your application is in release mode, okay, because you're releasing it. So why do I say this? Checking if an application is debuggable is as easy as this. So you're just basically checking that the flag is debuggable, and if it's true, then your application is debuggable. But the reason I say this is because changing an application, a release application to debug, is really easy. Like, so easy that you can basically do that. So I'm opening the manifest file on my application. I'm saying Android debuggable true. So this is what I changed. And now this application is debuggable. So anything that wasn't supposed to show in my application when you run it, now shows. Stuff like logging, for example. If I have any logging, if I have anything in my any of the like HTTP requests and everything, I can actually log those things now because the application is in debug mode. So in your code, you can check for that. But now, I talked about a few things, like I talked about a bunch of things actually, and this is when people get baffled and they go like, okay, so I'm not doing any of those things, like am I in trouble? Like, what do I do? There are a few things you can look at. Okay, so if you're an Android developer running Android Studio, most likely you are using one of these two things here. Most likely you are using ProGuard, because ProGuard is free. And this is what ProGuard does. So it's installed by default. Okay, so as soon as you start a new project in Android Studio, unless you disable ProGuard, ProGuard is installed by default. It does stuff like name obfuscation, for example. It does code optimization, and it does tree shaking. So anything that is not used by your application just gets removed when you compile your application to release. Okay, and this is really good because it keeps you on the maximum number of methods you can have, makes your application leaner. So this is helpful, okay? So if you have anything that isn't necessary for your application, this thing is just going to go and remove it, okay? And it does it really well. Now, Dexguard is just the counterpart of ProGuard, and as you can see, it's just like an upside-down logo. It's the same thing. Dexguard does a few more things. Dexguard does like class encryption, call hiding, string encryption. It does certificate pinning for you as well, which is cool, and it does tamper detection. So it does most of the things I told you about out of the box. Like you have Dexguard and it does it for you. There's one difference which you can probably guess by now. This one is free. This one costs money. So this one actually costs a lot of money. Like the licensing model on this is a bit weird because you start on something like 4,000 euros, and then as you get more users, like the price goes up. So the licensing model on this is weird. But obviously, if you don't want to go through all these things yourself, like code all these things yourself, then you can use something like Dexguard. Okay? I don't work for this company, so I'm not really trying to get you to use it or not. But it's just one thing that you can look at. Look at the Safety Net API. This is also a really good one. This is free, okay? This is an API that is free. It's provided by Google. And what you get with the Safety Net API is you get whether this device is compatible. When you're talking about a device being compatible, you're checking, is this device compatible with the Play Store, which is where I would guess most of your applications will be at. Is this device compatible with it? Is this device rooted? So you're basically sending some information to Google, and Google gets back to you saying, well, yeah, this device is not compatible, this device is rooted. And at this point, you can make a decision, okay? So I suggest, if you want to check for device being rooted, I suggest using this thing, because hackers get clever and clever about how to hide the fact that a device is rooted, okay? So this thing is really good because they're trying to be on top of all the changes hackers actually make to hide the fact that a device is rooted or not. So this is a good one to check. Again, it's free, so no reason not to use it. The other thing is implements network security configuration. So this is a pretty new one. It's another API by Google as well. And it does stuff like trust anchors. It does debug only override. So even if you change an application to be debug, it will go, nope. It does certificate pinning for you as well. So this one is it's a bit more involved the way it works. You need to do a bit more configuration. But the beauty of this one is it does a bunch of things for you for free. Like, you're not having to code anything. And as soon as things change, this thing will catch up on it, as soon as you update the versions. The one caveat about this is this only works from Android N and above, which is pretty new. So if you're building applications for like devices that are below Android N, then maybe this is not for you. The one thing that I can tell you is a guy called Mark Murphy. He actually backported this to Android 4.2. So if you're doing anything that is 4.2 and above, then you can use Mark Murphy's version of network security configuration, with the caveat that Google doesn't support it. So it's like a community-supported library. With that, I think we have maybe 5 minutes. So with that, I just want to finish with a few things. One of the things is don't trust what you see out there. Okay? So don't trust devices, don't trust the internet, don't trust things. And not everything is what it looks like. So it's the one thing that you need to keep in mind. Like, not everything is what it looks like. And when it comes to safety, you need to make sure you protect yourself. With that, I've been Marcus Placona. My information is in there. Thank you very much. And I think we have some time for questions. And I've been told to remind you that you can vote through the app as well. So if you want to rate this talk, now is a good time.
Hi.
Hi.
So there is, as I know, there is a model for exposed which hides root from applications, root cloak or something like that. Is there any chance to detect is device rooted even with this model, or there is some issues?
So with if we're using, so there's a few things that actually hide root. So there's an app that is called Hide My Root, and basically what it does is it moves it moves the executable to a different place. So when your application actually looks for it, it won't find it because it's in a different place. So it's almost like your device is now not rooted anymore, like it moves it, okay? So there's a few places, or there's a few things that do it. With with this, with the safety net API, usually you can detect those things. Okay, so unless it's like a newer module, like a newer exposed module that I've not heard of, if it's the ones that are out there, they should be able to pick it up.
Hi.
Hi.
You told something about certificate pinning. Yep. What we can do for 24/7 running applications when the certificate expires and we need to replace it?
That's a really good question, and like my answer is not going to be really good for this because it's a pain. Yeah, so it's a pain because basically like the public key, it needs to live in your application, and when the certificate actually expires, you will need to go and change your application. So you need to make a new release, and you're probably gonna call it like you're probably gonna do what like other people do, like call it bug fixes. Like don't say anything, just call it bug fixes. But it's a pain. Like certificate pinning is really helpful, but it's a pain when the certificate changes or when the certificate expires. And with some certificate authorities, that actually happens a lot. So I don't have a good answer for this because right now there's not many ways you can do that. I believe that with network security configuration, there are ways you can mitigate this. You can make this whole process easier. Okay, but yeah, you will need to like release a new version of the app, which is not ideal. But you can always call it like, continuous deployment. Like I'm deploying every day.
Hi. Have you tried any of those experiments with Unity? And can you share with us some insights if you have done some of such experiments?
I've not. But the same things I described here will apply to Unity. Like, well, everything I've done with Unity is what most people have done, which is like open it and like compile the demo application, say, oh, this is cool, and never look at it again. But like all the things I described here, they will apply to Unity applications, or they will apply to like iOS applications, because apps can be decompiled, and Unity like ultimately compiles to Java bytecodes, which can be decompiled, and so you have the same issues. But I haven't personally tried to hack a Unity application.
Okay, thank you.
So a lot of the checks you're talking about, like it was checking various things. Is the idea of that just to kind of frustrate the attackers to make it a bit harder rather than actually preventing them? Because presumably if you've got tamper protection and somebody's decompiled and tampered your application, they can just remove
it.
Tamper protection.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do, and this is why I say like there's no silver bullets, because there isn't really. Like there's not one single way I can tell you that is going to make your application safer. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get the hacker to move on. Okay, and like unfortunately with anything on the web, it's really like this. Like you're trying to make it really hard for hackers to target you. So you're trying to make the hacker move on. And the more you harden it, the harder it will be for hackers to actually break into it. But there's not one single thing that will make sure it's like completely secure. And it's the same with the web. Do you know what I mean? If someone wants to hack your website, they will do it. Any more questions?
Just to follow up on one of the previous questions, rather than doing certificate pinning, can you not pin the public key? And then if it expires, you can...
Yeah, you can pin the public key. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.